Hello, this is Mr. Glasgow. Today, we'll be going over some vocabulary words that are essential to know before we embark on our Civil War unit. Before we begin this guide to Civil War vocabulary, I want to discuss the images at the top of this first page. The map that you see at the top left corner is a map of the United States during the Civil War. The states in yellow are the Union states, which are mostly located in the north. The states in orange are called border states. West Virginia is sometimes counted among them, even though it didn't become a state until about the middle of the Civil War. We'll learn more about the border states a little bit later. The states in pink are the Confederate states, or the states in the South, which rebelled against the federal government and seceded from the Union. The first of three flags used by Confederate armies is located at the bottom of the page, whereas the Union flag is located at the top. These flags are used often to differentiate between the two sides in pictures and in drawings, so keep an eye out for them. Let's begin. Like I said earlier, the following vocabulary terms are essential to know in order to get the most out of our Civil War unit. Pictured at the top of the page are the leaders of the two sides during the Civil War. On the left-hand side is President Lincoln, the president elected in 1860 by the country right before the South seceded. And to the right is Jefferson Davis, who was elected by the rebellious states in 1861. Pictured at the bottom of the page is an artist's rendering done by Kurz and Allison in 1890 of the Battle of Chickamauga in Georgia. Can you spot the Union flag and the Confederate flags pictured here? Keep an eye out for those. We'll learn more about them later. Here we have a quick preview of the terms that we'll be learning today. Read these out loud and take the time to write them down. Make sure to leave space to write down the definitions as well. Feel free to pause the video at any time in order to give yourself more time to write everything down. The first term we'll be looking at is abolitionist. This term refers to those in the United States who advocated for the freedom of American slaves. Another term for this is emancipate, or to set free. The term abolitionist is also used to define the movement to free the slaves as a whole. The picture at top left is a badge used by the abolitionist movement and was placed on letters, pamphlets, and other literature. The three people pictured from left to right are Lucy Stone, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass. All were prominent abolitionists, among others, and spoke out against slavery quite often. Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass were actually former slaves themselves, and they detail the horrors of American slavery from personal experience to the people all across the northern U.S. Antebellum is a term that can be used to describe any era before a major war, but in this case, it refers to the time period before or preceding the American Civil War. It was an era characterized by the debate over slavery in the United States, the future of the country as a whole and each state within that country, and if that future did indeed include slavery. Additionally, this era in the United States possessed a distinct architectural style, seen here by the Arcadia Plantation in South Carolina, the mode of dress, seen in the picture above, music and literature, as well as politics. Next, we'll talk about the border states more fully. The border states are states, pictured here in orange, which were slave states, or states which permitted slavery, but did not secede or break away from the United States with the rest of the slave states to the south. They stayed in the Union for various reasons, but many from those states still joined the Confederate armies or supported the Confederates in other ways, though perhaps more still supported the Union. West Virginia here split from the rest of Virginia in 1863 and became the fifth border state. The slaves in these states were not freed by Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but were freed by the 13th Amendment in 1865 after the war ended. Our next term is Confederacy. The Confederacy is a title that was adopted by the states, pictured here in red, located in the southern U.S., which rebelled and seceded from the Union in 1860 and 1861. They are also known as the Confederate States, or the Confederate States of America. After losing the Civil War, the Confederacy was disbanded, and the rebellious states were placed under military occupation until readmitted to the Union under new state constitutions. The term conscript was used to refer to the men who were forced to join the army of either side during the Civil War. Today, we would call these men draftees, men who were drafted into the military. Both the Union and the Confederacy drafted thousands of conscripts during the course of the war, though the Union was able to draft many more men than the Confederates because of a larger male population. Slaves who escaped from their masters in the South to the Union armies were referred to as contrabands. These former slaves were sometimes returned to their masters, but many more became soldiers, laborers, camp cooks, aides, scouts, and spies, among many other things. They were vital to the Union war effort and weakened the southern states by taking away a very valuable resource, labor. The next term we'll be exploring is the term federal. This term refers to the national government in Washington, D.C. During the Civil War, it was used to differentiate between the Union, with which it's synonymous, and the Confederacy. It was represented by the flag pictured here, which is very similar to the one the federal government still uses today. Popular sovereignty was a doctrine used by many in the South to justify slavery and its expansion into the American territories. Secessionists in the South felt that their state's sovereignty was being ignored by the federal government and abolitionists in the North, and thus separation from the federal government was the only way to protect their own sovereignty. Pictured here is Stephen Douglas, an 1860 presidential candidate who championed the absolute right of any state to decide its own policies, especially in regard to slavery. He was against secession, but saw the doctrine of popular sovereignty as a way to keep the country together. The Reconstruction era refers to the time period following the Civil War in the U.S. During this time, the federal government attempted to restructure Southern society, moving from an agricultural to an industrial base by rebuilding factories, roads, railroads, etc., rehabilitating freed slaves by building schools and housing, drafting new state constitutions, and adopting the Reconstruction Amendments, which gave African Americans in the United States freedom and the right to vote. During much of the era, the former Confederacy was placed under military occupation to help facilitate this process. Unfortunately, this effort was unsuccessful, and African Americans were placed under a type of pseudo-slavery characterized by harsh black codes designed to subjugate Southern blacks. It is also characterized by the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan, which terrorized blacks and whites alike if they dared to speak out against the black codes and the injustice they imposed. It is also characterized by the laws which prevented many African Americans from voting and exercising their civic duties. Reconstruction ended as the federal government turned its attention to the Indian Wars happening in the western U.S. in the 1870s, and as the abolitionist wing of the Republican Party lost its power in Congress. The situation of the African Americans in the southern United States would not improve until the civil rights movement of the 1950s and the 1960s. Sectionalism refers to the attitude which places your own state or region's interests ahead of the interests of your nation as a whole. Sectionalism is seen as a major cause of the Civil War. The South needed slavery to fuel their agricultural industry and their economy in general, and felt the North was actively trying to stamp it out. The North saw slavery as a blight on the nation and wanted to contain it in the southern United States, keeping it from Western territories. The debate over slavery heated up to the point of mistrust and animosity between the two sections, and eventually led to the Civil War. The last term we'll be looking at is total war. Total war is a methodology of warfare which does not discriminate between military and civilian targets, but treats them equally. This includes the destruction of roads, railroads, homes, farms, crops, and etc. General William Tecumseh Sherman of the Union Army referred to it as hard war, and his march to the sea in 1864 exemplifies it precisely. Sherman swept south through Georgia, plundering and burning along the way, in order to convince the people of the South to abandon the Confederate cause, which he eventually did. In the face of such whole-scale destruction, the war ended less than a year later. Total warfare is a tactic used by many armies across the world still today. This concludes our overview of the Civil War vocabulary, but you can click on this link located here at the bottom of this page in order to learn more. Come to class tomorrow prepared to learn all about the American Civil War. Bye-bye for now.